There's something different about the way your mind works. You've known it since childhood. The speed at which you dismantle conversations while everyone else nods along. The way you spot the flaw in a plan before anyone finishes presenting it. That strange, almost painful awareness that most people around you operate on a completely different frequency. You've carried that feeling your whole life without a name for it. Today, you get the name and the 7 markers that confirm it. But here's what will unsettle you. A sharper mind doesn't make life easier. It makes it lonelier. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why. Habit 1. You argue with yourself before you argue with anyone else. Most people form an opinion and defend it like territory. They plant a flag in whatever they believe first and spend the rest of their lives fighting anyone who tries to move it. They call this conviction. It's not. It's intellectual laziness. Wearing the uniform of certainty, you do something different. You attack your own ideas before they leave your mouth. Researchers in the Journal of Individual Differences have linked this directly to higher analytical intelligence. It's called dialectical thinking, the ability to hold 2 contradictory ideas in your mind simultaneously and examine not to find a comfortable middle ground, but to genuinely stress test your own beliefs the way an engineer stress tests a bridge before letting traffic cross it. Most minds can't do this. It feels like betrayal to question your own conclusions. It triggers deep, almost physical discomfort that psychologists call cognitive dissonance. The average person resolves that discomfort by choosing one side quickly and ignoring the other. It feels like relief. It feels like clarity, but it's the intellectual equivalent of closing your eyes during surgery because the sight of blood makes you uncomfortable. Your mind doesn't flinch. You sit in the discomfort. You let the contradiction breathe. You interrogate your own reasoning the way a prosecutor interrogates a hostile witness. Only after the internal trial is complete do you speak. This is why people find you slow to commit. They mistake your deliberation for indecisiveness. They think you can't make up your mind. The truth is the opposite. You refuse to make up your mind cheaply. During the Manhattan Project, physicist Niels Bohr frustrated nearly every colleague he worked with, not because he was difficult, but because he would argue against his own theories in the middle of presenting them. He'd propose an idea, then immediately attempt to destroy it, sometimes mid-sentence. His colleagues found it maddening, but Bohr understood something they didn't. The most dangerous idea is the one you fall in love with before you've tried to kill it. His internal arguments produced insights that shaped nuclear physics for a century. He wasn't indecisive. He was thorough at a level most minds can't sustain. If you constantly debate inside your own skull, questioning your conclusions before they harden into beliefs, you're not confused. You're operating a cognitive engine most people don't possess. It costs you the blissful ignorance of easy answers. But what it gives you is worth more. Accuracy. Habit 2. You get bored in conversations that excite everyone else. There's a particular kind of boredom that has nothing to do with laziness. It's the boredom of a mind that processes information faster than it's being delivered. Someone's telling a story. The room is engaged. People are leaning in, reacting, laughing at the right moments. And you're already 3 steps ahead. You predicted the punchline. You identified the point they're building toward. You mapped the trajectory of their argument before they reached the second sentence. Now you're sitting there waiting for them to arrive at a destination you reached 90 seconds ago. David Robson, in his research on cognitive processing speed, documented what he calls the curse of rapid pattern recognition. Individuals with higher processing speeds don't just think faster, they predict faster. They unconsciously model the trajectory of conversations, arguments, and narratives in real time. The result? Ordinary social interactions begin to feel like watching a movie you've already seen. This isn't arrogant. You didn't choose to be bored. Your brain is simply running at a clock speed that doesn't match the conversation, and it creates a strange kind of isolation. You can't express it without sounding condescending. You can't explain it without being misunderstood, so you learn to mask it. You nod at appropriate intervals. You fake engagement. You perform interest. But inside, your mind is restless. It's hungry for something denser, something that matches its speed. And when it doesn't find it, it starts to wander, not aimlessly, but constructively. You start connecting ideas from unrelated fields. You notice patterns between the conversation, something you read last week, and a problem you've been turning over in your mind for months. This wandering isn't a deficiency. Research from Scientific American Mind has repeatedly linked this type of spontaneous ideation to elevated creative intelligence. Your mind isn't drifting because it's weak. It's drifting because the current input is beneath its processing capacity, so it reallocates resources to more complex problems in the background. The Japanese chess master Yoshiharu Habu once described this during casual matches. When the game was too simple, his mind would begin solving problems from previous, more complex games entirely without his permission. His brain refused to operate below its capacity. This isn't distraction. It's overflow intelligence seeking a worthy container. If ordinary conversations bore you while the rest of the room is captivated, don't pathologize it. Recognize it. Your boredom is a diagnostic tool. It's telling you the altitude at which your mind naturally operates. Habit 3. You change your mind and feel no shame about it. The average person treats a changed mind like public humiliation. They'd rather defend a position they know is flawed than endure the social cost of admitting they were wrong. Their identity is welded to their opinions. To change the opinion is to destabilize the identity, and most people aren't structurally sound enough to survive that kind of renovation. You're different. You've changed your mind on things you once believed with absolute certainty: political positions, career decisions, judgments about people, and instead of feeling defeated by the reversal, you felt something strange: relief, clarity, the sensation of a misaligned bone snapping back into place. Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying this. In his research on cognitive flexibility, he found that the willingness to update beliefs in the face of new evidence is one of the strongest correlators of superior judgment, not raw IQ, not education, not experience. The simple willingness to say, "I was wrong, and here's what I now believe." Kahneman himself modeled this behavior publicly. He was famous for changing his position during academic debates, sometimes reversing his stated conclusion mid-lecture. If a student or colleague presented a stronger argument, his peers found it disarming. Some found it suspicious. How could a man of his stature admit error so casually? But Kahneman understood that intellectual honesty isn't a vulnerability. It's the highest form of cognitive discipline. The mind that cannot update is the mind that cannot improve, and the mind that cannot improve is the mind that calcifies into irrelevance, no matter how brilliant it once was. There's a term in intelligence research for this: actively open-minded thinking. It was formalized by psychologist Jonathan Barron, and it measures the degree to which a person seeks out information that contradicts their current beliefs. Most people score low not because they're unintelligent, but because the emotional cost of being wrong is too high for their ego to absorb. Their self-worth is stitched so tightly to their certainty that pulling one thread unravels everything. Your mind doesn't have this fragility. You can separate what you believe from who you are. You treat your opinions like hypotheses, not heirloom, and that allows you to move through the world with a speed and accuracy that bewilders people who are still clutching yesterday's conclusions like they're sacred texts. If you change your mind frequently and feel sharper after each revision, that's not inconsistency. That's a mind that prioritizes truth over comfort. And in a world addicted to certainty, that's almost obscenely rare. Habit 4. You notice what's missing before you notice what's present. Here's a test that separates sharp minds from average ones. Walk into a room. Most people will immediately catalog what's there: the furniture, the people, the noise, the energy. Their perception is additive. They build reality by stacking visible elements. Your mind does the inverse. You walk into the same room, and the first thing you register is what's absent: the person who should be there but isn't, the conversation that stopped a half second too soon when you entered, the detail in the proposal that was conspicuously avoided, the question no one is asking. This is called negative space cognition, and it's terrifyingly rare. In visual art, negative space is the area around and between subjects. Untrained eyes ignore it entirely, but master artists know that the empty space defines the composition more than the objects themselves. The same principle applies to intelligence. What people choose not to say is almost always more revealing than what they do say. What's excluded from an argument often tells you more about the argument's weakness than any flaw in its logic. During World War II, Allied statistician Abraham Wald was asked to determine where to add armor to bomber aircraft. The military had studied planes that returned from missions and mapped where the bullet holes were concentrated: the wings, the fuselage, the tail. Every analyst recommended reinforcing those areas. Wald said the opposite: armor the areas with no bullet holes, the cockpit, the engines, the fuel system. His reasoning was lethal in its clarity. The planes they were studying had survived. The bullet holes showed where a plane could be hit and still fly home. The areas with no damage weren't unscathed. They were the areas where, if hit, the plane never returned at all. Every other analyst saw what was present. Wald saw what was missing. That single insight saved thousands of lives. If your mind naturally gravitates to gaps, absences, and omissions, you're operating with a form of perception that most people will never develop. You see the world not as it presents itself, but as it tries to hide itself. And that's a form of intelligence that no test can measure, but no adversary can withstand. Habit 5. You feel exhausted after socializing not because you dislike people, but because you're processing them. There's a specific kind of fatigue that has nothing to do with physical exertion. You leave a dinner party, a meeting, a casual gathering, and you feel drained in a way that sleep alone can't fix. People assume you're introverted, they assume you're antisocial, they assume you don't enjoy company. They're wrong on every count. What's actually happening is far more complex. While the average person at that dinner table was engaged in one layer of interaction, the spoken conversation, your mind, was simultaneously running 4 or 5 parallel processes. You were tracking the words being said. You were analyzing the micro-expressions that contradicted those words. You were modeling the social dynamics between every person at the table. You were cataloging tone shifts, pauses, deflections. You were constructing a real-time psychological map of the room. You weren't just present, you were conducting surveillance. Susan Cain's research on introversion and cognitive load illuminated this exact phenomenon. She found that individuals with higher sensitivity to environmental stimuli aren't withdrawing from social situations because they lack interest. They're withdrawing because their brains are consuming vastly more data per interaction than the average person. The fatigue isn't emotional. It's computational. Your hardware is overheating because it's running software that most people's systems don't even have installed. Charles Darwin embodied this with eerie precision. He was known to attend scientific gatherings and dinner parties, appear fully engaged, contribute meaningfully to conversation, and then retreat into total isolation for days afterward. His wife Emma wrote in letters that Charles would return from social events looking as though he'd been carrying furniture for hours. He hadn't. He'd been carrying conversations, but for a mind like his, conversations were furniture-dense, heavy, and requiring enormous effort to move through. Darwin wasn't fragile. He was processing at a depth that consumed energy most people never expend. His social exhaustion wasn't weakness. It was the cost of perception. The exhaustion isn't a bug. It's the receipt. It's proof that your mind was working at a level the room couldn't see. You weren't just listening. You were decoding, and decoding human beings in real time is one of the most energy-intensive cognitive tasks that exists. If you consistently feel depleted after social interactions that leave everyone else energized, stop treating it as a disorder. Treat it as a signal. Your mind isn't malfunctioning. It's functioning at a resolution so high that the processing cost is visible in your body. Most people leave a conversation with a memory. You leave with a blueprint. Habit 6. You're uncomfortable with your own intelligence. This is the habit that no one expects, and it's perhaps the most telling marker of a genuinely sharp mind. You don't walk around feeling intelligent. In fact, you often feel the opposite. You feel uncertain. You feel like you're missing something. You look at people who are confident in their knowledge and wonder how they do it, how they can be so sure, how they can speak with such authority about things that, from your perspective, contain layers of complexity they haven't even begun to address. This isn't imposter syndrome in the way popular psychology defines it. This is something deeper. The Dunning-Kruger effect, documented extensively in psychological research, reveals an asymmetry that borders on cruelty. People with limited knowledge in a domain dramatically overestimate their competence. They don't know enough to know what they don't know. The inverse is equally true. People with genuine expertise consistently underestimate their ability, because they're acutely aware of the vast territory they haven't yet covered. Your discomfort with your own intelligence isn't a flaw. It's the direct mathematical result of knowing more. The more you learn, the larger the perimeter of your ignorance becomes. A person who has read one book on economics feels like an expert. A person who has read 50 feels like a beginner. The circle of knowledge expanded, and so did the border it shares with everything unknown. British mathematician Andrew Wiles spent 7 years in near total secrecy working on Fermat's last theorem, one of the most famous unsolved problems in mathematics. When he finally presented his proof in 1993, colleagues described him as visibly uncomfortable with the praise, not because he was humble in some performed way, but because in the process of solving the problem, he had encountered dozens of adjacent problems he couldn't solve. His success had shown him how much he still didn't understand. The solution had made him feel less capable, not more. If you carry a quiet discomfort about your own mind, if you flinch when someone calls you smart, if you feel like a fraud despite evidence to the contrary, Stop interpreting that as weakness. It's the clearest sign that your cognitive map is large enough to include its own blank spaces. The fool sees a complete picture because he's never looked beyond the frame. You see an incomplete picture because you know the frame isn't the boundary. Habit 7. You have a relationship with time that disturbs other people. You think about death more than the average person, not in a morbid way, not with anxiety or dread, but with a cold, clear awareness that time is a non-renewable resource, and most people are spending it as if they have an infinite supply. This is the habit that separates a sharp mind from a merely educated one. Education fills the mind. Awareness of mortality sharpens it. You watch people waste hours on arguments that won't matter in 6 months. You watch them chase approval from people they won't remember in 5 years. You see them pour energy into feuds, gossip, status games, and performative busyness. And something inside you recoils, not with judgment, but with bewilderment, because you can't understand how they don't see the clock. Research published by the American Psychological Association found a direct correlation between time awareness and strategic thinking. Individuals who maintain a conscious, non-anxious relationship with their own mortality make significantly better long-term decisions. They're less susceptible to sunk cost fallacies. They're more willing to abandon failing projects. They're faster to cut relationships that drain rather than build, not because they're cold, because they understand the math. Every hour spent on something worthless is an hour stolen from something that could matter. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius kept a private journal, never meant for publication, in which he repeatedly reminded himself that he was going to die not as a punishment, as a calibration tool. He would write variations of the same idea. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. He wasn't depressed. He was awake. He used mortality the way a navigator uses a compass, not to frighten himself, but to ensure he was still moving in the right direction. You do this instinctively. When someone asks you to commit your time to something, your first internal question isn't, can I? It's, is this worth the hours it will cost me? Knowing I'll never get those hours back, that calculation runs automatically beneath your conscious awareness, filtering every request, every opportunity, every relationship through a lens that most people don't acquire until it's too late. This is why you sometimes appear distant or detached to people who don't understand you. They think you're aloof. What you actually are is selective. You have an internal economy that values time above money, above status, above social currency. They call it antisocial. You call it arithmetic. If you carry this constant low-frequency awareness of time, if you find yourself unable to waste it the way others do, understand that this isn't morbidity. This is a cognitive orientation that the majority of humans never achieve. Most people only develop this awareness in their final years, when the clock becomes impossible to ignore. You developed it early, and that gives you something no amount of intelligence alone can provide: precision of purpose. So now you've seen them. 7 habits, 7 markers etched into the daily behavior of a mind that operates at a frequency most people can't detect. You argue with yourself before you argue with others. You're bored by conversations that captivate the room. You change your mind without shame. You see what's missing before you see what's present. You're exhausted by the invisible labor of reading people. You're uncomfortable with your own capabilities. And you guard your time with an intensity that others find unsettling. These aren't quirks. These aren't personality defects dressed in flattering language. These are the operational signatures of a mind that's processing the world at a depth and speed that comes with a very specific cost. Loneliness, not the loneliness of having no one around. The loneliness of having no one who operates the way you do. The loneliness of seeing something clearly and being unable to explain it to someone who doesn't have the wiring to receive it. You've spent years wondering if something was wrong with you. If your boredom was a deficiency, if your exhaustion was a weakness, if your inability to stop thinking was a curse. It's not a curse. It's a cost. It's the cost of carrying a mind that was built for a depth of engagement that the modern world doesn't demand and doesn't reward. But here's the part that changes everything. The world doesn't reward it publicly, but privately, in the decisions that shape careers, relationships, and legacies. It's the only thing that matters. The loud mind gets attention. The sharp mind gets results. The popular mind gets followers. The precise mind gets freedom. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're not strange. You are simply awake in a room full of people who are still dreaming. And the discomfort you feel isn't a signal to go back to sleep. It's the price of sight. So the next time someone tells you that you think too much, that you're too intense, that you need to relax, understand what they're actually saying. They're saying your frequency is making them uncomfortable. And that discomfort is not your problem to solve. It's your proof of concept.